indirect cost. This is the third element of the total cost. When we are determining the total cost, the third element is known as overhead. So what is the overhead? How we account the overhead cost in the business, we are going to discuss today. And either this weekend or next weekend, we are going to have one special lesson, more probably on 21st of October, because by that time we will be done with some exercise on the overhead. So we would like to conduct a special class in which we can do one more activity on the payroll and overhead, so that you can have enough exercise and explanation on various activities before you write your test 2. And when you are preparing, you can also see that what are the areas of difficult. So maybe not this weekend, but next weekend, either on Saturday or Sunday, we are going to have one extra class for 2 hours. Just for sake of the time allocation, I would like to know on 21st of October, do you have any test 2? If you have any test 2 on Saturday on 21st, please notify me by a message and also indicate the time, what time the test has been scheduled, so that we can check our time for the class accordingly. So you are not going to miss the test and as well as the class. All right, now I'm going to share the slide on overhead. Before I start, would you like to ask anything? Anyone?
Ma'am, the test is on the 24th, right?
No, the test is on 27th. If you see on the, what is called, course outline, it is scheduled on 27th.
Okay, ma'am.
Yes. So it is, I think it is on 27th. I'll double check and then confirm the date, right?
Because on the outline it's the 24th.
It's saying 24th. No, don't worry. That one I will communicate. The course outline saying 24th. Okay, are you able to see the slide? It's okay. We will confirm the date and the time. Don't worry. Hello? Hello? Sorry, can you please mute your mic? Everybody, can you please mute your mic? Unless if you are saying something to me. If you are sharing something, then it's fine. Otherwise, I will confirm the date for the test 2, okay? In the next lesson.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right. Can you see the slide, everyone?
No, ma'am.
It's not visible. Now, are you able to see now?
Yes, ma'am.
So we are starting the third major topic on the overhead costing. So here we are going to learn about the accounting for factory overhead. Our main objective to learn under this topic is definition of overheads, assignment of direct and indirect cost, uh, on the cost object or cost center, classification of overhead, and identify the cost behavior pattern. Like some of the overhead costs change as per the production level is changed, like the other cost we discussed at the beginning, and then some they change according to the function. So what are the various cost behavior pattern we are going to discuss here. Then the principles of overhead cost apportionment and absorption, because overhead is a sum of indirect cost. Indirect cost, if you remember, what is the indirect cost? Indirect cost are the cost which is not easily or directly traceable to the product. You cannot identify how much it is incurred on the one product or one item. So those ones are known as uh, indirect cost, and in total they are known as overheads. So what is the criteria? What are the principles to share that cost among the cost unit or cost object and otherwise cost center, and how to absorb on each of them, which we are going to learn under this. Then some of the cost has to allocate it to the cost center or cost unit, and some of the cost has to be apportioned. Apportion means share. You have to share it among the various units or center. So what's the actually difference between the allocation process and apportionment? There are two different words which has different process. So what is the difference between allocation and apportionment? And also to know how to deal with the overheads of service department, because most of the business, they are, even if they are doing the production, making goods or running as a retail center, they also have the service department. Service department may be in a form of IT service, who is always make sure that their equipments are working properly, they are well updated with the software programs. Then maintenance department, the maintenance department make sure that they have all the equipments, machineries, and all the equipments and machineries are working properly. When they damage, electricity equipments are damaged, so the maintenance department people come and work. So they are not directly working on the product, the cost from the service department, but those departments are there to support the main activity of the business, like IT department, uh, maintenance department, store department, so that the production or retailing can be go smoothly. So if any overhead cost incurred in the service department, how to deal with those costs in the business. And then last but not least, how to apply overhead using the predetermined rates, the rates which is already determined. Come in. Yes, ma'am.
You haven't entered my marks. And then,
But we are in the class. Are you not attending class?
I didn't know about them.
So you missed the physical class as well.
No, I went there one time.
Okay, so the definition of overhead is overhead. How to define the overhead cost? The overhead cost is an aggregate of indirect material, indirect wages, and indirect expenses. Thus, the total of indirect expenditure is called overhead cost, where we find the sum of all the indirect cost, which is incurred maybe as a material if it is manufacturing business, or are we together? So you can define the overhead. Overhead is the aggregate of indirect material cost, indirect labor cost or wages cost, and indirect expenses. When we write their total, it is known as overhead cost. Okay. In another terminology by SEMA, how they define the overhead cost, they define it as this is the expenditure on labor, material, and service that cannot be economically identified with a specific uh, unit or a specific product or cost center. So it also have the same meaning, but it is in the different form. The overhead cost are the expenditures which is incurred on labor, material, services that cannot be identifiable with a specific sellable cost unit. Like there is so many example of overhead cost, like indirect material means like in carpentry business, when people are making furniture, the cost of glue. The cost of glue is treated as a indirect material cost. Labor, the salary or wages of the works manager, because works manager, he is working for the whole factory, but he is not only assigned for the one activity, but more than one activity. So his salary will be treated as indirect labor cost, and then it will be a part of overhead. So we cannot identify with a specific unit how much time he spent on one unit when it was manufacturing in the business, and how much it will be any cost object or cost center. In another way, we can also define it is the overhead is the cost or any expenditure that is over and above the prime cost. You know what is the prime cost? The prime cost is known as the sum of direct material, direct labor, and the direct expenses. When you add them, the total of it is known as prime cost. So anything which is not the part of prime cost will be known as overhead. So overhead, we can also define any expenditure, any cost which is over and above the prime cost will be known as overhead cost. Do you understand the definition of overhead cost? Do you understand the definition? All these three?
Yes.
Okay, so we can proceed. Now, how to assign between as a direct and indirect. I think you all remember what is the direct cost, what is the indirect cost, but you can read again. Just read. So how we implement the direct and indirect cost? Direct costs are the cost this is directly or specifically given to any cost object of a printer. Like if you are making a table, the cost of wood which is used in the table, the cost of iron rods which is used on the table can be, we identify their cost. Laune, can you please mute your mic? So that is known as direct. So we know that, okay, we use maybe 5 meter length of the wood to make a table. So we know that what is the cost of 5 meter timber or the wood. So we can easily identify and trace that cost to the product. So when the cost is traceable, it is direct cost. Like in bakery business, when someone baking the cake, and they know that to make a one large size cake, they use 500-gram flour to make the cake. So we know the cost of 500-gram flour. So the cost of flour can be treated as a direct cost because we can easily identify with the cost object or cost product. We know that, oh, we use 500 grams. So 500 grams will be the flour cost for the cake. But in the same, some of the cost which is not directly traceable to the cost object. So all those costs which is not directly traceable to the cost object will known as indirect cost. Like in the making the cake, if someone also using maybe a bit cream or a cinnamon powder or maybe baking powder, so the quantity is not measurable because it's too small. So the cost of either the baking powder or any other flavor they are adding, it's not traceable. So that cost has to be allocated to the product. So all those costs which is not possibly traceable to the cost object, then they are assigned to the cost object by using a method. That method is known as cost allocations. That method is called cost allocation. By this example, you can understand if the cost is directly traceable, direct cost, it is goes to the cost object means any item, any product which is we are making or any product which is they are retailing, selling to the customer. It can directly, if it is related to that product, it is goes directly to that cost object. Like in retailing business, someone is selling the electronic equipments, they are selling television, refrigerator, air con. So when they are also installing the television in someone's house, we know that, okay, so television is the cost object. We know that, okay, the transportation cost incurred for the product, we can directly trace to the product. But some of the cost, which is not easy to identify with the cost object, then those costs has to be allocated by two methods. Number one is known as traditional costing method or traditional costing system. Come in. And the other one is known as ABC system. Move the chair. So there are two different methods to the class time. You're not attending class. Hmm? No, today I'm taking both class because my neck is not. So I'm taking both class online. Just attend. Or you take and then attend. So those costs which is not traceable to the product, they are they are going to either the traditional costing system or activity-based costing system. When we are using those systems, that is called for cost allocation. But those costs we know directly with the product, it can directly assign to the cost object. So do you understand the difference between how we assign direct and indirect cost to the cost unit or to the cost object? And just remember, this cost object can be a product, can be a part of the product, can be a service. Object means not always a product or a item. It can be a service like in the bank or in the insurance company. Insurance policy can also be a cost object in which the insurer insuring their property, maybe house or car or a human. So cost object can be a living and non-living things. Are we together? So direct tracing, you know that, okay, if the transportation charge is 200 pula 500, we can directly add to the cost object or cost unit. But allocation, what is the meaning of allocation? Before we go for the allocation, we also need to know the cost classification. So what is the meaning of cost classification? Cost classification is a process of grouping cost according to their common characteristics. When we divide the cost into various groups according to their same nature or same characteristics to establish of the series of special group according to the cost class, that process is known as classification. Like in the UB also, the student has been grouped according to the courses. Those who are doing cost accounting, they will be in one group. Those who are doing English, they will be in the one group because the common characteristics is the same course. That type of course the students are doing. So here also we classify the cost in a specific group according to their character. Like all the fixed cost will be in one group. All the variable cost will be in one group. Or the direct cost can be in a one group or indirect cost can be in the one group. So when we are grouping them according to their nature, and that process is called cost classification. Now let's see how the cost classification will take place. Here are some of the example of cost classification. Cost classification can be done based on various factors like functions when we are dividing the cost based on their activity, it is called by function. When we dividing the cost according to the based on element of cost or component of cost, then it is called classification on elements. And when we are classifying the overhead cost according to their behavior, how they change, it is called classification by behavior. So if we classifying the overhead cost, indirect cost by function, it can be classified into four categories: production overhead, administration overhead, selling and packaging overhead, and at last one is known as distribution overhead. Okay, so you can check there according to the different areas, they have been classified into four groups. If we are classifying the indirect cost or the cost which is not traceable into various groups based on the element, they are called as a material cost, labor cost, and other expenses. But as it is related to the overhead, So they are called indirect material because direct material is not the part of overhead. Only the indirect material will be the part of overhead. So as an element, it can be in a form of indirect material, indirect labor, and indirect expenses. I'm going to show some example related with each category. Then behavior-wise, it has been classified into 3 categories: fixed overhead, variable overhead, and semi-variable overhead. Fixed overhead. What do you understand by the fixed overhead? What kind of indirect cost is that? Indirect means it's not traceable to the product. That's why it is called indirect cost, but they are also fixed. Fixed means
It doesn't change, ma'am. It stays constant.
in what term it doesn't change? It doesn't change
Ma'am?
if the production level change, either increase or decrease. This kind of indirect cost will still remain same. So that's why they are known as fixed overhead, right? Like the rent of the building. If you produce more goods or if you produce less or no production, the rent of the building will be remain same. Okay. Variable overhead. What do you understand by variable overheads?
Ma'am, they change or vary with the level of production.
They change as per
Level of
what?
production.
Can someone add more on it? Can someone add? So remember, these are all expenditure. They are all cost. And when we are saying overhead cost, it means we are talking about indirect. Variable means they change time to time based on the level of activity change. If the activity increase, the cost will also increase. If the activity decrease, the cost will also decrease. Like in baking business, if someone, if we are making 50 pieces of cake in a week, so if it is rent, either you are making 50 or 40, the rent will be the same. So rent is the fixed overhead. But the cost of flour, the cost of butter or eggs, if you are making 50, there will be certain cost. But if you are making 60 or 70, the cost will also increase because as you increase the number of cake, the quantity of flour, eggs, butter will also be increased. If you reduce the quantity, the cost will also reduce. So the variable, which is change according to the level of production or the level of activity. Semi-variable overhead. What do you understand by semi-variable overhead? Where the costs change but not change as in the same ratio as the production or service level change. Is change, some part of it is fixed and some part of it change when the level of production goes beyond that limit. So that is called semi-variable overhead. Now, now you understand what are the overhead costs and the process we need to allocate the overhead cost on a document. But which document we are going to account, because we are learning on the perspective of an accountant to recording a business transaction in the various books of account. So in which document, in which account are we going to record the overhead? So the document which is used to record the overhead cost only, uh, more specifically, it is called factory overhead. That document is called overhead analysis sheet. This sheet may be used to keep a subsidiary record. This is not the main book, but it can be a subsidiary record of the factory overhead expenses. Those expenses can be recorded in the books, secondary books, either based on the expenses, the type of expense, like the expense of stationery, the expense of the container in which we record, or maybe the material expense, labor expenses. So we can divide those expenses based on their categories. Or it can also be recorded on the basis of departmental. So we classify the cost, how much cost is going to department 1, department 2, department 3, etc. If we are recording departmental wise, when there is no much difference between the individuals' appearance or individuals' what is called workload. Because if they are all okay, if we are coming for the same business, then the cost can be classified in a form of expenses or department wise, like how much cost is going to the production department, how much cost is going to the purchase department, supply department, and maintenance department. So we can also prepare the overhead analysis sheet based on the departmental wise and expense wise. General factory overhead expenses. So what is the all overhead expenses which is incurred at the factory or at the production unit are not identified with a specific department. So when we don't know how much for production, how much for assembly department, how much for sales department, when we don't know, because overheads are the indirect costs, then in this situation, they are charged to departments by a process, and that process is called overhead cost allocations, or that process is also called overhead allocations. When the expenses are not easily or not clearly identified or fiable with the specific departments. Maybe like in a carpentry business, when the factory making the various type of furniture, so the furniture is going to the cutting department. In first department, they cut the leather or they cut the woods into various shapes. Then it will go to the assemble department. Then the assemble department people, they assemble those uh, pieces which is cut by the cutting department and make the furniture. Then it will go to the finishing department. After assembling, then the finishing department people, they do the final touch up, greasing, varnishing, putting polish, make sure that the design is look appropriate. So the total product goes through the 3 departments. And now the overhead cost is incurred like electricity, because electricity has been used in all these departments. So the electricity bill has to be apportioned or allocate to those 3 departments, because when you pay 500, but now this 500 is the bill from 3 departments, so it need to be allocated. So when we do the allocation, that process is called allocation of overhead cost. Allocation may be made for each item of expense as incurred, or expenses may be accumulated and allocation made at the end of the accounting period. Yeah, they add all those expenses, and then at the end of the accounting period, they allocate to the various department or various expenditure item on the ratio in which they incurred to the each department. Like here, you can see some of the example, the cost allocation among the departments. Suppose there is a business, production factory, they have some overhead cost like indirect material, indirect labor, electricity charges, depreciation on machineries, general factory expenses. So when they allocate based on some element or factors, you will see the total, the indirect material cost is 740. Then this 740 has been shared among ABC department, 500, 200, and 800. So we use some suitable or adequate basis to apportion the 780 cost among 3 departments. If the labor, if direct labor total cost is, maybe this is the wages of cleaners, the cleaners who are cleaning all these 3 departments every day, department A, department B, department C, and the total amount paid to the cleaners is $260. So that 260 has to be divided among the department if we are preparing overhead analysis sheet on departmental basis. So now here's the question, how we are going to apportion the wages of workers. So sometimes depend on the number of workers, sometimes depend on how much time they spend on this department. Maybe the department A area is bigger than the department B or C. So more cost because they spend more time there. So more cost will go to the department A, and then so sometimes the floor area can be used to determine the wages, or sometimes the hours they use to clean department A, B, and C. We use the time to apportion the cost among the department. Electricity, the power total bill is 240. So how many electric points they have in department A, B, and C? We use that information to allocate the cost among the department. So that cost can be shared by those departments. But we present in this form, the way you can see currently on your screen. We write the information in the overhead analysis sheet in this form. Do you understand up to here?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Now, what are the stages or the steps in overhead accounting? So all the stages has been classified into 2 categories. Number 1 is known as administrative steps in overhead accounting. Number 2 is known as computing steps of the overhead accounting. Administrative means which is done by the management. But when we are talking about computing, we are talking about the role of accountants, the accountants who are doing those activities. But administrative work is done by the managers or any other administrator. Like they need to first collect the information of overheads, maybe from a store department, how much material, indirect material has been issued to which department, how many labors, because the administrator is the one who keep the record, who produce the record and maintain. So administrative staff, they produce and collect the information of overheads, either related to the indirect material, labor, and other expenses. Then after collecting that information, they classify that information and also do the codification. Codification, I will explain both of them. What is the classification and codification? So after collecting the information, then later on, they go for calculation for computing part, where they start with some of the cost which is directly or easily available with the department. With the department. Like if we know, oh, this much rent for department A, this much rent for department B, so we allocate that cost to that particular department. Then some cost which is we don't know how much for each department, then we need to do the apportionment. Share the cost among the departments or among the unit. That process is known as apportionment. And then when you apportion the cost with production and service department, then the service department cost need to be reapportioned um, by the production department. And at last, we calculate the absorption rate of the overhead. So do you understand what are the stages in accounting procedure of overhead? Just read one more time. Have you read? Now let's go to the next slide. Okay, now here you need to understand the terminology we used in overhead costing. Codification, come in. What is the meaning of codification? Write your details, contact details. Codification, what is the meaning of codification? Codification is the technique of intelligent description of numerous cost accounting heads for recording and controlling purpose. Like sometimes instead of writing the whole details of the employees, then or the details of the each item, because sometimes the product name is too large, too big. Like if in a carpentry business they are using various types of wood, um, timber, then each wood has a different specific name. So instead of writing the names of each item, they give a code number like W1, WO, 1314, and then they make their recording procedure more easier so that they can identify the group by a code. So it's just a simple procedure, codification, to give a code number to a specific item or to a specific cost so that it can be recorded by their code. And it's also easy then later on, furthermore, if they want to know that if this item is still in the store or it is about to finish, they can just check by using the code number how much stock is remain or available of that item. They just enter the code number and get the result of it. So that's why the codification helps to grouping the group items of the overhead of similar nature. A cost into the course, your course name Introduction to Cost Accounting, but we also given a code number ACC 201. So when we say ACC 201, all of you able to understand, okay, we are talking about Introduction to Cost Accounting, is the accounting cost. If we are saying that ENG 108, so we can understand, oh, this is the English course and the first year level, this one. So codification is helps to grouping the item of the similar nature. Then allocation. What is the meaning of allocation? Allocation is a process of identification of overheads with a specific production or service department. I'm repeating again, is a process of identification of overhead cost with a specific department. Like when you know, okay, this, like when the store department supplying the material to the various departments, like in a carpentry business, they are supplying some material to the cutting department, then some material to the assembly department, some material to the um, finishing department. So they recorded, okay, this item goes to the cutting department. So we know that how much cost is goes to the cutting department. Then what material they issue to the finishing department. By that record, we can identify those overhead costs with a specific department. So we allocate that cost to that particular department. Like labor cost, we know that, okay, 5 people has been done the overtime in department A. So the overtime pay for those 5 people will be allocated to department A. 2 people in department B. So how much overtime paid for the 2 people, that cost will be allocated to only department B. Same for others. So uh, allocation is take place when we identify the cost with a specific department. Number 3, apportionment. What is the meaning of apportionment? It is the allotment, not allocation. It is the allotment of proportion of the cost to the department or to the unit, like rent. When you pay the rent, you pay the rent for the entire building. But you need to know that how much rent for cutting department, how much rent for assembly department, how much rent for finishing department. So we know that the total rent is 4,000. But in 4,000, how much is going to be cutting department, assembly department, finishing? So we use a suitable base to allocate the portion of the cost to those departments. So when you're allocating the portion of the cost to the various departments, that process is known as apportionment. So we use these terms, codification, allocation, and apportionment in the overhead costing. Now, what is the apportionment, how we do it, allocation? We are going to discuss in the Friday class. Okay. So Friday, hope my neck will be fine. So Friday class will be physical at 12 and on Teams. will be at 5 p.m. Okay. Please, people, attend the tutorial classes and also the classes which is we are conducting physically or online, so that you no need to revise a lot when you are preparing for your test 2 and exam. Tutorial timetable is already uploaded on Teams and Moodle. You click and select any one of the group. And again, I'm reminding those students who can't see their marks on ACS, please bring your script to my office so that I can double check your marks. Thank you. Anything else you would like to ask?